At least I can say goodbye to the mistress, right?
You're a servant. Scum is some. You're not allowed near the mistress.
Wanda stood still. $19 an hour. A frail mother waiting at home. Gerald stepped closer.
You should have known your place from day one.
Eleanor Cole hadn't spoken in 5 years. 2 million in professionals. None worked. But Wanda did. She sang. She held her hand. She helped her eat again. And for that, they kicked her out.
Besides sweeping toilets, what can you do that the mistress needs?
Wanda said nothing, folded her apron, turned toward the door. What no one ever asked was who Wanda Young really was. A billionaire watched it all on camera, and what he discovered didn't just change his mind, it changed everything. The Cole estate sat behind iron gates at the end of a quarter-mile driveway in Greenwich, Connecticut. 22 rooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling walnut shelves, a private theater, a garden maintained by 3 full-time staff. From the outside, it looked like the cover of a magazine. From the inside, it felt like a tomb. Harrison Cole built his fortune from nothing. Son of a construction foreman from Bridgeport, he founded Cole Defense Systems at 30, turned a small logistics operation into a $3.1 billion empire. He solved every problem the same way, with money, a better doctor, a better facility, a bigger check. It had never failed him, until Eleanor. Eleanor Cole was once the first violin of the New York Philharmonic. Only 3 women in the orchestra's history had ever held that chair. She performed at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center. When she played, audiences didn't just listen, they held their breath. 5 years ago, driving home from a late rehearsal at Lincoln Center, a delivery truck ran a red light and struck her car on the driver's side. The impact shattered 3 bones in her left hand and severed a nerve that would never fully heal. She would never play at a professional level again. That was the night Eleanor Cole disappeared. Not physically. She was still there, sitting in a small room in the East Wing, curtains drawn, lights dimmed. But the woman Harrison married was gone. She stopped playing, stopped painting, stopped reading, stopped speaking in full sentences. Doctors diagnosed it as treatment-resistant depression compounded by profound identity loss. Harrison called it something simpler, the slow death of the woman he loved. He moved fast. He always did. He spent $400,000 on a hyperbaric chamber, built a meditation pavilion in the garden, flew in specialists from Vienna, Sao Paulo, London. He purchased a Stradivarius violin worth $1.2 million and placed it in Eleanor's room, believing the instrument might reignite something inside her. Eleanor never opened the case. She wrote one word on the lid in black marker, "Don't," and turned every framed photograph of herself performing face down on the shelf. Then Harrison found Dr. Lillian Graves. Graves was the most celebrated music therapist in America, author of the best-selling book Sound and Soul, Healing Through Music, a TED Talk with 4 million views, features on CNN, NPR, The Today Show. Her signature method, something she called resonance response therapy, was considered groundbreaking. Harrison hired her at $15,000 a month. She arrived at the estate in a black Mercedes, greeted at the front door, coffee served in porcelain cups in the living room. She called Harrison by his first name. Everyone called her doctor. In 5 years, she billed the family nearly $900,000. She submitted lengthy reports filled with clinical jargon. She adjusted treatment plans quarterly. She introduced 4 different protocol variations. Eleanor did not improve, not once. But Graves always had an explanation. The severity of the condition, neurological complexity. We're building a foundation. She never accepted responsibility. She never questioned her own method. Because questioning the method would mean questioning where it came from, and that was a door Lillian Graves could never afford to open. Then there was Gerald Whitfield, 61 years old, estate manager, former 5-star hotel operations director. Gerald ran the household staff of 9 with military precision and quiet cruelty. He assigned schedules, approved uniforms, controlled access to every floor, every wing, every room. Gerald had a system for names. The chef was Chef. The nurse was Nurse Bradley. The driver was Mr. Tate. But when Wanda Young was hired 18 months ago, Gerald never once used her name. He called her the help. In staff meetings, the new one. To Graves, the cleaning woman. To visitors, he said nothing about her at all, as if she didn't exist. Wanda Young, 54 years old, 5'5", gray uniform, worn soft at the elbows. She arrived every morning at 7 through the service entrance, signed a clipboard, and began mopping the first floor. She ate lunch alone in the laundry room. Plastic cup, brown bag, 30 minutes. She clocked out at 3 and drove 40 minutes to her apartment in Stamford, where her 81-year-old mother sat in a recliner, slowly forgetting her own daughter's name. Alzheimer's, early stage, no insurance. Wanda had nothing, no savings, no credentials on the wall, no power in that house, no voice in any room that mattered. But she had something nobody in that mansion could buy. She had a voice. It started with a meeting Wanda was never invited to. Dr. Graves gathered everyone in the dining room. Harrison, Gerald, Catherine Aldridge, who flew in from Boston, the private nurse. Mahogany table, crystal water glasses, leather chairs. Wanda was mopping the hallway outside. No one closed the door. Graves presented her newest plan, a residential treatment center in Switzerland, $200,000 for 3 months. Eleanor's condition requires total environmental control. This house has too many distractions. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the sound of Wanda's mop moving across the marble. Too much noise. Harrison looked exhausted. Catherine nodded. Then Graves described the method she would use in Switzerland. She called it resonance response therapy. Musical call and response patterns designed to reach patients locked inside grief and trauma. She called it her life's work. Wanda stopped mopping. She knew that method. She knew it the way a mother knows her own child's face, because she created it. 20 years ago, in a small Baptist church in Harlem, she developed a technique she called call and heal, using gospel call and response to guide trauma survivors back to emotional connection. She shared it with a young graduate student named Lillian, who sat in the third pew on the right side and said she wanted to help people. That student took it, published it under a different name, built a career, a book deal, a TED Talk, all on the foundation of what Wanda had given away in good faith. And now that same woman sat in the dining room of the house where Wanda scrubbed floors, selling that stolen method for $15,000 a month. Wanda gripped the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. She said nothing. She went back to mopping. Nobody noticed. The next morning, Wanda was cleaning Eleanor's bathroom. Eleanor sat in the window seat, staring at nothing. Then Wanda hummed. She didn't plan it. An old gospel hymn. His eye is on the sparrow. Low and soft. Eleanor's fingers moved. A tap on the armrest. Then another. Then a third. Perfectly in rhythm. The reflex of a trained musician. A heartbeat answering a song. Wanda kept humming. Eleanor's breathing changed. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Something behind her eyes flickered. Faint, but alive. Then the door opened. Gerald stood in the doorway. His eyes moved from Wanda to Eleanor and back. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning, Mr. Whitfield." "Cleaning, with your mouth open. Singing to the mistress like she's your friend at Sunday church." He stepped closer. "You are not here to sing. You are not here to talk. You are here to clean. And even that, frankly, is more responsibility than someone like you should be trusted with. Someone like you." He didn't say black. He didn't have to. "Third right up. One more and you're out. Trust me, no one in this house will even notice you're gone." He walked out. Wanda stood still. She looked at Eleanor. Eleanor's fingers had stopped. The flicker behind her eyes was gone. Gerald had killed it. In 15 seconds, he undid what Wanda's humming had started. She finished cleaning. In the hallway, she pulled a small leather notebook from her apron pocket and wrote the date, the time, the song, and 4 words. Fingers tapping. 3 beats. Nobody saw her write it. Nobody knew the notebook existed. 2 weeks later, Catherine Aldridge's silver brooch went missing, a family heirloom, her grandmother's. Gerald searched the staff quarters. 30 minutes later, he called Wanda to his office. The brooch had been found near Wanda's locker. Catherine was there. Graves was there. Gerald sat behind the desk with the brooch in a plastic bag like courtroom evidence. "Explain." "I didn't take it, Mr. Whitfield. I've never been in Mrs. Aldridge's room." "You've never been in her room, but the brooch was next to your locker. How does that work?" "I don't know. I didn't take it." Catherine shook her head. "I want to believe you, but the evidence is right there." Graves spoke last, calm, clinical. "Harrison, I've expressed concerns about this woman before. She oversteps, she distracts, and now this. The decision is clear." Wanda looked at each face in the room. Not one believed her. Not one asked why a woman who had worked here 18 months without a complaint would suddenly steal a brooch worth less than her weekly rent. Gerald leaned forward. "I'll be honest, people like you come into homes like this, you see things you've never had, and the temptation gets too strong. It's not your fault. It's just who you are. People like you. It's just who you are." Wanda's hands trembled. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted salt. "I didn't take it." "You can go now." She walked out, down the hallway, past the kitchen, into the laundry room. She sat on a plastic chair and pressed both palms flat on her knees to stop the shaking. What none of them knew, what they would not discover until later, was that the hallway camera had recorded Gerald entering the staff area 30 minutes before the brooch was found and placing it near Wanda's locker himself. He framed her, because she was the easiest person in that house to blame. That night, Wanda sat at her kitchen table. Her mother was asleep. She opened her phone and typed a resignation letter. Her thumb hovered over the send button. She was done. She had every right to be. Then she remembered something from earlier that afternoon. Walking past Eleanor's room, the door had been slightly open. Wanda glanced in. Eleanor was sitting by the window, holding the pencil Wanda had left on the nightstand a week ago. In front of her was a blank sheet of paper. On it, Eleanor had written one word: stay. Maybe she wrote it to herself, maybe to the silence. But the handwriting was shaky and real, the first word Eleanor had chosen to write in over a year. Wanda looked at the resignation letter on her screen. She deleted it. She opened her leather notebook and wrote, "Mrs. Cole wrote one word today. Stay. I will stay." The question was, for how long? Because what was coming next would test Wanda in ways she never expected. The morning after the brooch accusation, Wanda showed up for work at 7. Gerald looked surprised. He had expected her to quit. She didn't quit. She mopped the first floor. She cleaned the kitchen. She said nothing to anyone. But at 5:30 that morning, 90 minutes before her shift, Wanda had stood in her own kitchen in Stamford and cooked a bowl of oatmeal with honey and cinnamon. The same recipe she used to make for Clarence during his chemotherapy, when he couldn't keep anything else down. She poured it into a container, drove 40 minutes to the estate, and left it outside Eleanor's door before anyone in the house was awake. No name, no note, just a warm bowl on a cold floor. The nurse found it at 7:15 and assumed the kitchen staff had sent it up. Eleanor, who had refused breakfast for months, picked up the spoon and ate. Not all of it, but enough. Graves noted the improvement in her weekly report. She attributed it to a medication adjustment. Wanda said nothing. She made that oatmeal every morning, 5:30, before the sun came up, before anyone could see her. She carried it in the same container, set it in the same spot, and disappeared downstairs before the hallway lights turned on. By the second week, Eleanor began leaving the empty bowl outside her door, a signal. Then one morning, tucked beneath the bowl, Wanda found a small piece of paper. One word in shaky handwriting. Cinnamon. Eleanor wanted more cinnamon. It was the first personal request she had made in over a year, and she made it to someone whose name she didn't even know. Wanda read the note in the laundry room. She smiled for the first time in weeks. The next morning, the oatmeal had extra cinnamon, but Wanda didn't stop there. She began leaving small things near Eleanor, not randomly, but with the precision of someone who understood what she was doing. A sprig of lavender on the nightstand, a cashmere throw draped across the window seat, a book of Monet prints open to water lilies, the painting Eleanor had once lectured about at Yale. She watched for responses. She recorded everything in the leather notebook: date, time, stimulus, reaction, duration. One morning she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Eleanor had been scratching the back of her left hand, lightly, repeatedly, leaving faint red marks, a self-soothing behavior the nurse had missed entirely. Wanda didn't report it. She had no authority to report anything. Instead, she left a small rubber ball on Eleanor's nightstand without a word. 3 days later, the scratching stopped. Eleanor was squeezing the ball instead. The red marks on her hand faded. Nobody knew why. Nobody asked. Then came the piano. Wanda was dusting the Steinway in Eleanor's room, the grand piano that hadn't been touched since Eleanor moved in. She lifted the key cover to clean underneath. Her fingers brushed the keys. Instinct took over. She pressed a chord. D minor, then a few more notes. The opening of Debussy's Reverie. Soft, almost accidental. She caught herself and stopped. Silence. Then, from across the room, Eleanor spoke. "Don't stop." 2 words. Her voice was cracked and dry, barely louder than a breath. But they were real, voluntary, alive. The first words Eleanor had spoken to another person in over a year. Wanda's hands trembled over the keys. She sat down on the bench, and she played. The whole piece, not perfectly. She was a singer, not a pianist. Her timing was uneven. Her left hand fumbled twice. But she played, and Eleanor listened. From the first note to the last, her eyes were open, her breathing was steady. Her fingers tapped the armrest, not randomly this time, but following the melody, counting the beats the way a trained violinist counts. When the final note faded, Eleanor closed her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Wanda sat still for a long moment. Then she closed the key cover, picked up her dusting cloth, and left the room. In the hallway, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Mrs. Cole spoke today. 2 words. Don't stop. She is still in there." What Wanda did not know, what she could not have known, was that camera 7 in the East Wing hallway had recorded the entire exchange. The footage sat in a server in the basement, untouched, unwatched. For now, over the next 3 months, Wanda's visits to Eleanor's room became a quiet, deliberate routine. Every morning she hummed while she cleaned, changing the song each day. Gospel, jazz standards, lullabies. She watched Eleanor the way a scientist watches an experiment, tracking which melodies triggered a response. She wrote it all down in the leather notebook. Date, song, reaction, duration. The strongest response came from Amazing Grace, the same piece Eleanor had performed as her final encore at Carnegie Hall years before the accident. By week 4, Wanda introduced call and response. She would sing a phrase, then leave a gap of silence. At first, Eleanor didn't react. By the second week, Eleanor hummed the final note. By the 4th week, she sang an entire response line. Her soprano voice, thin, cracked, buried under years of silence, came out shaking. But it came out on pitch. The instinct of a musician never dies. It just waits. One morning, Wanda entered Eleanor's room and stopped in the doorway. The Stradivarius case was open. The violin lay on the bed. The word "don't" on the lid had been crossed out with a single black line. Eleanor hadn't played, but she had opened the case. For the first time in 5 years, she had given herself permission to look. Wanda stood there for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her cloth and began dusting, as if nothing had changed. But in the hallway afterward, she wrote in her notebook, "She is giving herself permission to remember." Meanwhile, something was shifting in the house, and not in Wanda's favor. Graves had noticed anomalies in the data. Eleanor's cortisol levels were dropping. Her sleep patterns were stabilizing. The nurse reported she seemed more present in the mornings. But Graves's therapy sessions were in the afternoon, and Eleanor showed no improvement during those hours. The progress was happening on someone else's clock. Graves asked Gerald one question. "Has anything changed in the morning routine?" Gerald didn't hesitate. "The maid. She's spending more time near Mrs. Cole's room than her schedule allows." That was all Graves needed. She called a meeting with Harrison. Gerald attended. Graves spoke in her clinical voice, measured, authoritative, impossible to argue with unless you held a medical degree of your own. "I'm recommending a 60-day therapeutic isolation protocol. No unauthorized contact with Eleanor. No staff interaction outside the approved care team. This is a critical phase, Harrison. One disruption could undo months of progress." She paused. "Specifically, I need the housekeeper removed from the East Wing entirely." Harrison, exhausted and desperate, approved it without argument. Gerald delivered the news to Wanda the next morning. He didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. "New policy. You're restricted to the first floor. The East Wing is off limits. You don't go up those stairs. You don't go near that hallway. You don't even look in that direction." Wanda stared at him. "For how long?" 60 days. Doctor's orders." "Eleanor needs—" Gerald cut her off. "Eleanor? Since when do you call the mistress by her first name?" He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You forget what you are in this house. You clean. That is all you do. That is all you will ever do. Stay in your lane." Wanda said nothing. She picked up her mop and walked to the first floor. The first week without Wanda, Eleanor collapsed inward. She stopped eating breakfast. The oatmeal disappeared because Wanda couldn't reach the East Wing to deliver it. She closed the curtains again. The violin case was shut. The nurse reported Eleanor sitting beside her door for hours, motionless, as if waiting for someone who never came. Graves reviewed the data and told Harrison it was a normal adjustment period, expected, temporary. It was not normal. It was not temporary. It was a woman losing the only person who had reached her in 5 years. On the 10th day, Wanda was in the laundry room on the first floor, folding sheets. Directly above her, Eleanor's room. Through the ventilation duct in the ceiling, she heard a sound. Crying. Not dramatic. Not loud. The kind of crying that comes when there's nothing left. Just broken breathing and small, exhausted sounds that nobody was meant to hear. Wanda stood under the vent, both hands gripping a bedsheet. She knew what going upstairs meant. Termination. No severance. No reference. Her mother's insurance? Gone. She stood there for 2 full minutes, listening to Eleanor cry through the ceiling. Then she set the sheet down. She went to the cabinet where she had been hiding a container of oatmeal every morning. Still cooking it at 5:30, still bringing it, still hoping, and she picked it up. She walked to the staircase. And she climbed. She wasn't thinking about credentials. She wasn't thinking about her notebook, or her training, or her method. She was thinking about Clarence, about the nights he couldn't sleep from the pain, and she sat beside him in the dark, singing until his breathing slowed. About the last thing he ever said to her. Don't ever let someone suffer alone if you can be there. She opened Eleanor's door, set the oatmeal on the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed, took Eleanor's hand, and sang, quietly. His eye is on the sparrow. The same hymn, the same low contralto. Eleanor's crying slowed, her fingers tightened around Wanda's hand, her breathing steadied. Then she whispered, voice raw, barely a sound. I thought you left. Wanda squeezed her hand. I'm still here. She stayed 20 minutes. Then she went back downstairs, washed her hands, and resumed folding sheets as if nothing had happened. From that day on, Wanda defied the isolation order every single day. 20 minutes during her lunch break, when Gerald was eating in his office. She brought oatmeal. She sang. She held Eleanor's hand. She draped Clarence's old wool blanket, the last thing she had of his, worn soft at the edges, smelling faintly of saxophone resin and aftershave, over Eleanor's shoulders, because the air conditioning ran too cold, and nobody had bothered to adjust it. She gave away the most precious thing she owned, not because it was a therapeutic strategy, because Eleanor was cold. For 2 weeks, it worked. Then Gerald decided to check the hallway camera log and saw the timestamps. Wanda, East Wing, 12:15, every single day. He brought the evidence to Graves. Graves brought it to Harrison. She violated a direct medical order. This isn't insubordination, Harrison. This is a liability. If Eleanor harms herself during unauthorized contact, you are legally exposed. Harrison listened. He rubbed his eyes. He nodded. Terminate her. End of the week. The clock was ticking, and Wanda had absolutely no idea. 2 days before Wanda's scheduled termination, a young man named Dennis Farrell saved her job, and he didn't even know it. Dennis was the estate's security technician, 23 years old, quiet, good with systems. His job was to maintain the cameras, back up the servers, and make sure nothing crashed. He never watched the footage himself. That wasn't his role. But that Tuesday afternoon, running a routine storage audit, he noticed something unusual. Camera 7, East Wing Hallway, was consuming 5 times more disk space than any other camera on the property. Motion-triggered recordings had been firing consistently during mid-morning hours for over a year. Thousands of clips. He assumed it was a malfunction. He opened the first file to check. It wasn't a malfunction. On screen, in grainy black and white, Wanda Young sat on the edge of Eleanor Cole's bed. She was holding Eleanor's hand. She was singing, low, steady, a hymn Dennis didn't recognize. And Eleanor was listening, not staring at the wall, not frozen, listening, eyes open, fingers tapping softly on the blanket. Dennis opened another clip. Wanda reading aloud from a book of paintings. Eleanor turning pages on her own. Another. Wanda humming while placing a sprig of lavender on the nightstand. Eleanor leaning forward to smell it. Another. Eleanor drawing something on a piece of paper. Shaky lines, unsteady, while Wanda sang beside her. Dennis sat back in his chair. He opened clip after clip. 147 recordings across 14 months. And in every single one, Eleanor Cole was doing something the entire household had been told was impossible. Responding. Engaging. Living. Then he reached a clip from 3 weeks earlier, and he stopped breathing. Eleanor was having a panic attack. 10:40 in the morning. She gripped the windowsill with both hands, hyperventilating, her whole body shaking. The nurse was not in the room. No one was. Then Wanda walked in. She didn't shout. She didn't run for help. She knelt beside Eleanor, took both of her hands, and spoke in a voice so calm it sounded rehearsed. Except it wasn't rehearsed. It was practiced. 5 things you can see, Eleanor. Tell me 5 things. Eleanor gasped out fragments. Window, light, hands, your hands. Good. 4 things you can touch. Eleanor's breathing slowed. Her grip loosened. Within 4 minutes, the attack was over. Wanda stayed for 20 more minutes, humming softly, until Eleanor fell asleep. Dennis was not a doctor. He was not a therapist. But he had watched enough clips to know one thing with certainty. What Wanda was doing in that room was not cleaning. It was not casual kindness. It was something structured, deliberate, and deeply skilled. He had a choice. Report it to Gerald, the way protocol demanded, or go directly to Harrison Cole. He chose Harrison Cole. That evening, Dennis brought a hard drive to the private theater and connected it to the projector. Harrison sat down. Dennis pressed play. 1 clip, then 5, then 20. Harrison watched for 3 hours straight. He did not speak. He did not move. He watched his wife smile, something he hadn't seen in years. He watched her sing. He watched her open the violin case. He watched her laugh at something Wanda said while pointing at a painting. He watched a woman earning $19 an hour do what $900,000 could not. When the screen went dark, Harrison sat in silence for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called his attorney, Nathaniel Brooks. I need a full background check on a woman named Wanda Young. Everything. Education, career history, publications, licenses, everything. The file arrived at 8 the next morning. Wanda Young, born in Harlem, New York. Lead vocalist of the Mount Olive Baptist Church Choir from age 18 to 38. Creator of the call and heal method, a therapeutic technique combining gospel call and response with trauma recovery practices. Used for over a decade in community healing circles across 3 boroughs. Documented in church records and 2 local newspaper features. The method later appeared, without attribution or credit, in the doctoral dissertation of one Lillian Graves, rebranded as Resonance Response Therapy. Harrison read it twice. He set the file on the table. He stared at the ceiling, and he said one word, barely above a whisper. How? How did this woman, this voice, this mind, this gift, end up mopping his floors? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? Harrison did not fire Wanda. He canceled Graves' next appointment and called a meeting in the dining room, the same room where Wanda had been excluded, where decisions about Eleanor's life were made without her, where she had mopped the hallway while others spoke about her as if she were furniture. This time, Wanda was invited inside. She sat at the mahogany table for the first time. Gerald was there, visibly confused. Catherine, joined by video from Boston. Nathaniel Brooks, Harrison's attorney, sat at the far end with a folder. Dr. Graves had not been invited, but when she learned the meeting was happening without her, she drove to the estate and walked in uninvited. She sat down without being asked. She looked at Wanda across the table. Her jaw was tight. Harrison stood. He walked to the wall-mounted screen and pressed play. The footage rolled, clip after clip. Wanda singing, Wanda holding Eleanor's hand, Wanda guiding Eleanor through a breathing exercise. Eleanor laughing, a sound no one in that household had heard in years. Eleanor drawing, Eleanor humming along to a hymn, Eleanor opening the violin case. The room was completely silent. Gerald stared at the screen like a man watching his alibi collapse. Catherine covered her mouth. Nathaniel Brooks took notes without looking up. Graves watched for 90 seconds. Then she spoke. Turn it off. Harrison didn't turn it off. Turn it off, Harrison. What you're showing is evidence of unlicensed therapeutic practice. This woman, she pointed at Wanda, has no credentials, no certification, no authorization. She has been conducting unauthorized treatment on a vulnerable patient. This is a legal matter. I will file a complaint with the state board by the end of the day. Her voice was controlled, professional. The voice of a woman who had spent 20 years learning how to sound right even when she was wrong. Harrison paused the footage. He turned to Wanda. Wanda, why didn't you tell anyone? Wanda looked at him, then at Gerald, then at Graves, then back at Harrison. Because no one in this house ever asked me what I knew. They only told me what I was. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Gerald shifted in his chair. Catherine pressed her hand harder against her mouth. Graves recovered fast. This is exactly the problem. An untrained individual with a savior complex, inserting herself into a clinical case she doesn't understand. Harrison, I have dedicated 5 years to your wife. I have published research. I hold a doctorate. I have a proven method that requires clinical precision. What this woman is doing is reckless and dangerous. Nathaniel Brooks spoke for the first time. Calm. Measured. Dr. Graves, Miss Young did not present herself as a licensed practitioner. She did not prescribe medication. She did not bill for services. Under Connecticut law, human compassion is not a regulated activity. Graves opened her mouth. Brooks continued. However, I do have a question about your method, the one you call resonance response therapy. Could you describe its origins? Graves stiffened. It was developed during my doctoral research. It's published. It's cited. It's... Dr. Graves, Wanda's voice cut through the room. Quiet. Steady. Not angry. Something worse than angry. Certain. Your method, where did you develop it? Graves turned to her. For the first time since the meeting began, she looked directly at Wanda, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker. Not guilt. Recognition. Mount Olive Baptist Church, Wanda said. Harlem, 2004. You sat in the third pew, right side. You wore a green coat. You told me you were writing a dissertation on community healing. You asked me to explain my method, the one I called Call and Heal. I spent 3 hours with you. I drew diagrams on the back of church bulletins. I sang examples. I gave you everything I had because you said you wanted to help people." She paused. The room held its breath. "You took it. You changed the name. You published it as your own. You built your career, your book, your TED Talk, your $15,000 a month practice on work I did for free in a church basement. And you never once said my name." The room didn't breathe. Nathaniel Brooks slid a document across the table. Church records, newspaper clippings, 6 signed witness statements from former congregation members confirming Wanda as the originator of Call and Heal. Graves sat perfectly still. Her face was white, her hands flat on the table. She looked at the documents, but did not open them. She did not deny anything. She did not apologize. "That is not how I remember it." "I'm sure it isn't," Wanda replied. Then a sound came from the doorway. Footsteps, slow, unsteady. Everyone turned. Eleanor Cole stood at the entrance to the dining room. She had walked there herself. No nurse, no wheelchair. Her hair was uncombed. Her feet were bare. But her eyes were open, fully open, and focused in a way no one in that room had seen in years. In her right hand, she held the Stradivarius violin. Draped across her shoulders was a worn wool blanket, faded, soft at the edges, smelling faintly of saxophone resin. Clarence's blanket. The one Wanda had given her because the air conditioning was too cold and nobody else had noticed. Harrison looked at the blanket. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't from the house. It wasn't cashmere. It wasn't anything he had bought. It was an old wool blanket that belonged to a dead man he had never met, and his wife was wearing it like it was the most valuable thing she owned. Eleanor looked around the room. Her gaze passed over Gerald, over Catherine, over Graves. Then it rested on Wanda. "Everyone brought me expensive things," Eleanor said. Her voice was thin but clear. "She brought me her husband's blanket. She didn't try to fix me. She just didn't want me to be cold." Harrison's hands dropped to his sides. Catherine was crying on the screen. Gerald stared at the floor. Eleanor lifted the violin. She placed it on her shoulder, the damaged hand gripping the neck, trembling visibly. She drew the bow across the strings, shaky, off-key in places, but the melody was unmistakable. Amazing Grace, the same hymn Wanda had sung to her every morning for 14 months. She played 8 bars, her hand cramped. She lowered the bow. But she didn't put the violin down. She held it against her chest like something precious she had just gotten back after a very long time. Graves stood up. "This is an emotional moment, I understand. But one song does not constitute recovery. I strongly recommend—" Eleanor turned to Graves, and for the first time in 5 years, she raised her voice. "Be quiet." 2 words, sharp as a bow strike across open strings. The room went still. Graves closed her mouth. Harrison stepped toward her. His voice was low, final. "Vivian, in 5 years and $900,000, my wife never once said your name. Today she walked across this house carrying a violin because of the woman you tried to have fired. We are done." Graves looked at Wanda one last time and walked out. Her heels echoed sharply down the marble hallway. The front door closed, the sound of her Mercedes starting. Then silence. Gerald was told to wait in his office. His turn would come. That evening, the crisis came. Eleanor had the worst panic attack in months, the emotional weight of the day crashing down all at once. The nurse called for help. Harrison rushed to the east wing. He stood in the doorway of Eleanor's room, watching her shake, and realized something terrible. In 5 years, he had never once known what to do in this moment. He had always called someone, written a check, delegated. Wanda was already there. She sat beside Eleanor on the bed. She took her hand, the damaged one, the one that had just held a bow for the first time in years. And she sang. Not Amazing Grace this time, but Precious Lord, Take My Hand. Clarence's favorite hymn. The one she had sung to him on his last night, holding his hand in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and goodbye. Her contralto voice filled the dark room. No microphone, no instrument. Just a woman singing to another woman who was drowning. Eleanor's breathing slowed. Her grip softened. Then, quietly, brokenly, she began to sing along. Soprano answering contralto. 2 voices weaving through the darkness, held together by nothing but breath and trust and the stubborn refusal to let go. Harrison stood in the doorway. He did not enter. He watched, and he cried, not from sadness, but from the unbearable understanding that the answer had been in his house for 18 months, and he had almost thrown it away. The next morning, Harrison found Wanda in the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench near the peonies, still in her gray uniform. She had come to work at 7 as always, as if nothing had changed. Harrison sat beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he apologized, not in general terms, specifically. For Gerald, for the brooch, for the isolation order, for never once asking her name until it appeared on a legal file, for building a system that listened to credentials instead of people. I spent $2 million trying to buy my wife's recovery, he said quietly. The answer was in my house the whole time. Then he asked the question that had kept him awake all night. After everything they did to you, why did you stay? Wanda looked at the garden, at the peonies Clarence would have loved. My husband was sick for 2 years. The last months he couldn't sleep from the pain. I couldn't save him. But I sat with him every night and sang until his breathing slowed. She paused. The last thing he ever said to me was, "Don't ever let someone suffer alone if you can be there." I looked at Mrs. Cole and I saw Clarence. Someone drowning while everyone on the shore was writing checks. I couldn't walk away. Not because I'm brave, because I promised. Harrison said nothing. For the first time in his life, a man worth $3.1 billion felt poor. Poorer than the woman beside him, because he had everything in the world except what Wanda carried in abundance. The courage to love without expecting anything in return. He offered her a formal position. Director of Therapeutic Music Care. $180,000 a year. Full benefits. Her mother's medical expenses covered. Wanda had one condition. Eleanor decides, not you. She walked to Eleanor's room. She asked. Eleanor took her hand and nodded. Don't stop singing. That afternoon, Wanda returned to the East Wing. Not through the service entrance, not during a stolen lunch break, not hiding from cameras. Through the front door. On the Stradivarius case, beneath the crossed-out word, don't, Eleanor had written 2 new words in black marker. Don't stop. The consequences came swiftly. Nathaniel Brooks filed an intellectual property inquiry regarding the origins of resonance response therapy. 6 former members of the Mount Olive Baptist Church signed sworn statements confirming Wanda Young as the creator of the original method. Church records and handwritten notes from her original workshops were submitted as evidence. Within weeks, Graves's TED Talk, 4 million views, the cornerstone of her public reputation, was pulled from the platform pending review. Her publisher requested a formal correction to Sound and Soul. A separate audit revealed 38 therapy sessions charged to the Cole family that never took place. Phantom appointments at $800 each, totaling over $30,000 in fraudulent claims. The woman who billed $900,000 could not explain where the healing actually came from. Graves was not destroyed overnight, but the foundation of her career was cracking, and the cracks were spreading. Gerald Whitfield was terminated the same week. When Brooks reviewed the laundry room hallway footage, the footage no one had ever checked, it confirmed exactly what Wanda had said. Gerald entered the staff area 30 minutes before the brooch was discovered and placed it near her locker himself. Deliberately. He was not prosecuted, but his career was finished. A review of his personnel files revealed a pattern: disciplinary write-ups disproportionately targeting staff of color. 3 former employees came forward with similar accounts. Catherine Aldridge flew from Boston. She sat with Wanda in the garden for an hour. She said, "I told you my sister needed real help. I was looking right at it and didn't see it. I'm sorry." Wanda accepted the apology. Not because it erased anything, because holding on to it would have cost more than letting it go. Eleanor's recovery was not instant. Depression does not vanish because of one song. But over 6 months under Wanda's structured program, now supervised by a collaborating psychiatrist, Eleanor changed. She played violin every morning. Not at concert level, not with the precision of a first chair. She played duets with Wanda, violin and voice, in the room where she had sat in silence for years. The sound carried through the hallways of Ashford Manor. The staff stopped what they were doing to listen. She opened the curtains. She walked in the garden. She returned to the master bedroom. She attended a weekly grief group in Stamford. Wanda drove her every Thursday. Harrison funded the Clarence Young Foundation, a nonprofit providing free music therapy to low-income families dealing with grief and trauma. Wanda served as its clinical director 3 days a week. The other 2 she spent with Eleanor. She returned to the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Harlem for the first time in 20 years. She stood before the choir, some of the same faces, older now, and she sang. The congregation rose to their feet before she finished the first verse. Harrison donated $500,000 to Howard University's music therapy program. In a private conversation with Brooks, he said something the lawyer never forgot. "I spent $2 million trying to fix my wife with money. The answer didn't cost anything. It just required me to see the person standing in front of me. The leather notebook, the one Gerald dismissed, the one Graves called irrelevant, now sat on a shelf in Harrison's study, preserved under glass. Its first entry, written on the day Wanda was hired, read, "Mrs. Cole looked at the window today, not through it, at it. She sees the glass. She wants out. She is still in there." Wanda knew from day one. This story is not about money. It is not about a billionaire who failed. It is about what we miss when we only see uniforms, titles, and price tags. Harrison Cole was not a villain. He believed the size of the solution had to match the size of the problem. But grief does not read spreadsheets. Healing does not come from the most expensive room in the building. It comes from the person willing to sit in the dark with you and sing until you stop shaking. Wanda Young was accused of stealing, banned from the person she was helping, called the help, told to know her place. She had every reason to walk away, every reason to stop. She didn't. Every morning at 5:30 she made oatmeal. She sang through hallways where no one thanked her. She gave away her dead husband's blanket, the last piece of Clarence, to keep a stranger warm. Not because anyone asked her to, because she couldn't watch someone suffer alone when she had the power to be there. That is not weakness. That is the rarest kind of strength. The world is full of Wandas, people whose brilliance is hidden behind uniforms, accents, and the color of their skin. People who are never asked what they know, only told what they are. The question is not whether they exist. The question is whether we are paying attention.